Hi, everyone. This is Gary Byrne, host of the Cyber Adventure Show, coming to you live today about an incredibly interesting and relevant topic, managing risk. And as an explanation of that, talking about the vCISO origin story within that. And to help me accomplish this, we have an amazing group of thought leaders. Let me introduce the co-founder, Bob Turner, who just chug some coffee. Make sure you swallow and you're fine.
I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah, and Bob and I have been cohorts in listening and learning to hundreds of thought leaders like you're going to be hearing from today. And if we're not careful, we'll be successful someday, right, Bob?
That's a distinct possibility.
And to help us do that, I want to bring to the show George Shea. Hey, George, you're on mute at the moment, just so you know.
Okay.
Hi, so glad to see you. Thanks a lot for being here. And you want to tell our audience a little bit about yourself, and then I'll bring in a couple other folks.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm the Chief Technologist at the Foundations for Defensive Democracy's Transformative Cyber Innovation Lab, FDD, for those who aren't aware. It's a small think tank in the DC area. So I've been there for the past almost 4 years. And prior to that, I worked at MITRE, and I've been working cyber issues for about 30 years now.
Wow. And I can tell you firsthand, George is one of the nicest, most humble, most competent professionals that I've had the privilege to listen and learn from in all my years of doing the show. And so, George, thanks so much for being my friend, if I can call you that.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Next, I want to introduce Brian Haugli. Brian is, I'm going to run out of superlatives, but Brian runs the largest vCISO company in the country, SideChannel. And Brian is also one of the nicest, sort of most humble people, that you're going to meet. Brian, you want to say hi in a few words, about yourself?
Thanks, Gary, Bob, George. This is great for having me on. Really looking forward to the discussion today. Absolutely love this space. It's the only field I've been in since I went pro after high school. So really looking forward to kind of giving back and just kind of going over, the vCISO space, security space, talking about risk. So thanks again for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's the kind of topic that unfortunately is never going away. One of our speakers a little bit later, Chris Hetner. Chris, I saw that you joined. If you want to turn on your video, I can bring you into the stream just to say hi to folks. Chris was the cybersecurity advisor to the Security and Exchange Commission, which I know everybody is paying, a little bit extra attention to, just because of some of the recent stuff that's going on. So let me welcome to the show, Chris. How you doing, Chris?
Hello. How are you?
Hi, good, thanks. We're just doing like a quick intros now, and then I'll bring everyone back in to the stream as we go through this great discussion. So, Chris, you want to just say 15 seconds about your background?
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Gary. So Chris Hetner here. I've been in the cybersecurity arena for about 30 years. Started early on building and operating data centers and security operations centers here in the New York City area, supporting major financial services and banking platforms. Went from the data center to put on a suit and became a executive at Citigroup, supporting their capital markets business on matters of technology risk and cyber. Went to take a role at GE Capital and became the global CISO. Did that for about 5 years and pivoted from the corporate world to management consulting, where I was at EY for a couple of years in Marsh McLennan Company, running their risk advisory practice for cyber, and had a unique opportunity to go serve with the U.S. government in the executive branch as a senior advisor to the Securities Exchange Commission. And so I did that for about 4.5 years. Now I'm back in the private sector and largely operate in the boardroom, CEO, general counsel and the CISO community on advancing cyber risk governance, board reporting, and was named as cyber risk advisor to the NACD community about 4 years ago. And so
that's the National Association of Corporate
National
Directors.
Association of Corporate Directors. It's a portfolio of about 24,000 board members, and our focus is on delivering board certification and training. We've got a certification program with Carnegie Mellon University. We advocate for regulations and different types of standards. And now, more recently, with the new SEC disclosure rules, it's starting to get real in terms of how do we disclose to the investor community and the regulators how these cybersecurity matters have material impact our business, operational, financial conditions. So we've launched an initiative about 2 years ago to help our very sophisticated board community, but not very technical, to understand this. And so that's
Chris, forgive the interruption. We're going to go deep into what you're saying during your presentation.
Perfect.
It's a great name for his presentation, Shift Up, because everyone knows about Shift Left, and Chris's whole thing is what he just started to say, which is incredibly important, how to get alignment. So Chris, we'll be coming back to you in a little bit.
Awesome. I'm going to take my camera off for a second. Thanks.
Okay. So I thought it would be worthwhile just to come up with some definitions, just so because risk can mean many different things to many different people, and it does. So I thought we would just quickly go over a few things from NIST. I know all of you are super familiar with it, and Bob, if you want to opine on for example, right here. So, there are all types of risk assessments, all types of ways of going about it. Bob, do you want to just share, some thoughts about that?
Yeah, and it really is, as the slide shows here, we have to frame the risk properly for whatever the information system is or the data that's involved. And we also have to be able to make sure we do a good risk assessment against that framework. I like to think of it as this is probably the most important part of the cybersecurity framework of identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Hard to do that just off the tongue here, but it's also really important to understand that within your organization, you really need to focus on the data and be able to assess the risk as that data moves throughout its life cycle.
And one of the interesting things about the NIST framework and about the reality of trying to understand and manage risk is is it tactical or is it more strategic? And that's what this slide basically goes about. We won't delve into it deeply. You can get a copy of these slides if you just send me an email, or you can go to the NIST website for sure. This is an interesting sort of three-stage process that they break down. Bob, maybe you just want to speak just about the titles: prepare, conduct, and kind of maintain generally.
Well, so and that's really the process is making sure that you understand the system, and that's the preparation phase. What are the components of the system? What is the data focus of the system? Where can you find out that information? That's important. Actually conducting the assessment is really probably the key. I mean, get the right data. What is that data telling you? Do you need to collect more data in order to be able to do a thorough assessment of risk? And then, of course, once you've defined the risk level of the item you're assessing, how do you maintain that? What are the things you need to be doing along the way, such as how often are you refreshing data? How often are you refreshing the equipment that is holding the data? How often are you looking external to the threat of from the cyber world to that data? That's
exactly. Yeah. And so that's just, setting the table a little bit. We could spend months on unpacking all of this. But one of the things that when Bob and I were talking, about doing something about the talent aspect of this is like, okay, where do you start? And because there's so much and there's so many things that are that are changing in the technology ecosystem, the CISO world and things like that, and so this is, I think, very interesting. Bob is going to share a little perspective, historically, through this storytelling way, by sort of linking Copernicus to all this and the idea of revolutionary thinking.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and unpack this just a little bit. So first of all, Copernicus was a disruptor. He took basically 15 centuries of thinking that the Earth was in the center of the universe and all the celestial bodies, revolved around the Earth, and he just did the math. The math at the time was just not effective to understand things like orbital paths and how to justify positions of the sun and positions of the moon and all of that. And really what he did was he used his foundation of math in relation to economics, and then he figured out that the equations they're using, they're really complicated and they are full of unnecessary calculations. So why not go for the simple answer? And that's probably the most important thing that Copernicus taught us, was it doesn't have to be complex.
Yeah, for sure. And that's one of the things that you and I always talk about, like, how do you make something complex easy peasy, or how, just to get your head around? And sometimes it sounds oxymoronic, but the Navy started getting involved. Then what happened?
Yeah, so this is back in the 1990s, folks, last century, and a very intelligent person by the name of Vice Admiral Jerry Tuttle, he said, you know what, we need to rethink this. We have all of these Cold War era systems, which are basically akin to what I call a self-flicking ice cream cone. The systems existed to be the system, and they really didn't have a focus other than doing what they did, processing messages, getting targeting data to the places where it needed to be, all of that. And I really, I was fortunate enough to be present during a conversation that Admiral Tuttle was having about Copernicus. He was saying that, Copernicus reshaped our thinking of where the universe was, and where our place in the universe was. And he said, you know what? It's the gravitational pull of the sun. In a couple of studies that were done, sort of in conjunction with him having that Copernicus moment, the emphasis on the things that were important in what we call the command control, computers, communications, C4, and intelligence world. And so they set about creating this Copernicus architecture, and this became a movement. This wasn't just Admiral Tuttle doing all this work himself, but it was a movement that was spurred by the need to put the warfighter in the center of the Navy's digital universe, so that they could have the information they needed when they needed it.
Well, just to build on that point, we're still in a similar situation now, in the sense that the defenders are somewhat hampered because they're vertically structured, and constrained by intellectual property or competition, or the patchwork of state, federal, global regulatory construct and stuff like that. So how much, if at all, has changed in this world?
Well, so it's been a third of a century now since Tuttle's Copernicus moment, and we're really connected more than ever before. Not only is it the warfighter, but everything we have connected in our digital world today. Businesses run on the internet. Businesses run on moving data back and forth. We entertain ourselves on the internet, and it's really interesting to look at a single moment on the internet. Now, this slide is a year or two old by now, but speeds and data volumes are just mind-boggling. Millions of people are watching Netflix, sharing life's precious moments on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn. and it's we're communicating via text messages. We're watching world events unfold in front of our eyes, and that's all because of the fact that the internet is out there, and we seem to be humans that are sort of at the center of that universe, if you think about it.
Well, and also, I mean, just to build on that point, with the advent of this next generation, compute, like NVIDIA and all the new AI focused, hardware and software that's coming out, that's only going to be exponentially, more true. I mean, like the impacts that you have listed here.
Yeah, well, so this is really this is the conclusion that I want to get to, and that's the fact is we're not keeping those business systems safe, despite the fact that there's plenty of guidance on how to do it. Just looking at the numbers on the right side there, I mean, it's mind-boggling. It really is. Is this our Copernicus moment? Do we need to take this time to think about the focus in our information universe, in our business universe, in our entertainment universe?
It sounds like it probably is, Bob, we can go on forever and people will be able to get in touch with you to learn more about this innovative, correlation between then and now and the universe and stuff. And to help us, Brian, I'm going to bring you into the stage to now, talk a little bit about the vCISO journey. And as we mentioned in our brief introductions, Brian is a real pioneer in all of this, including the cool way he's going to be using technology to share some information. Go ahead, Brian.
Hey, thank you, Gary and Bob. Yeah, sometimes the best technology is not digital, it's analog. And I do thank you for giving me some time on this. So I'm the founder and the CEO of SideChannel. We've definitely grown over the last 5 years to be the largest vCISO provider in North America, and I'm really excited about obviously what we're doing. Super grateful for the team that we've built, but really focusing on what we're focusing on is the topic of this discussion. The issue and kind of how the vCISO kind of was created. And we didn't obviously pioneer the vCISO concept. Fractional executive leadership has been around for a long time. We've just picked a niche and figured out how to scale it. At the heart of the issue, right? You've got major enterprises, right, that have the resources and the people to be able to do what they need to do to address risk. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that they have an infinite amount of money or a money tree in the backyard. I kind of joke about that. But generally, enterprises, especially when you're looking at the top 100, top Fortune 500, they're in a better position because they've got to be able to scale in both funding to be able to do it and the ability to attract people to address risk. And cybersecurity, as one of those risks, okay, does not really differentiate between the risk is on an enterprise or an SMB. And I'm just going to kind of bucket this into two groups, right? Obviously, you've got kind of large enterprise, small enterprise, commercial SMB, and then really kind of small businesses. But let's just kind of look at enterprise outside of enterprise and SMB as kind of two categories. This group right here is severely underserved when it comes to having the money to spend on addressing risks and being able to attract the right talent full time to come in to address and manage and govern and oversee everything that's required to handle risk. And that's just not cyber. I mean, we've seen SMBs that lack CFOs, right? People in charge of financial decisions. You don't see risk officers in SMBs. You see them in enterprises. So given that cybersecurity doesn't really differentiate where it has to play out, and remember, we're dealing with the triad of things, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. These companies, just like enterprises, are connected to technology or using technology or heavily dependent on technology to make all their business operations happen, okay? So therefore, cybersecurity is at play here. Well, if they have the resources to be able to hire a CISO, and let's just kind of pick on, the CISO role as kind of an all-encompassing concept to lead and govern and address cybersecurity. And obviously, underneath the CISO, you've got teams or teams of teams. But let's just kind of encapsulate, the leadership and the thinking and the governance of what's required to actually address cybersecurity as a risk in that CISO role. Okay, this group can not only afford to do it, but they can actually attract and retain the talent. And that's a big thing the SMB can't do. They do not have the resources like enterprise to be able to pay for this resource. And let's break down why that is. Hitch Partners recently came out with a phenomenal, as they have every other year. Shout out to Michael Piacente. All they focus on is recruiting for the CISO role. So they intimately know this position. And on the East Coast, this role as a CISO, you're looking at anywhere between 400 to 600K base salary, or sorry, total compensation. That's base plus bonus and anything else. All right, that's East Coast. On the West Coast, you're looking at anywhere between 500 and $1 million. Immediately out of the gate, you realize this group cannot afford that. But yet the risk still remains. So one, SMBs don't have the finances to be able to afford these people. So what do they have? Their options then become to go for less qualified individuals to be able to perform that same function because they don't have this type of resourcing. Is that the right play? Probably not. You know, do you want a master carpenter building your house, or do you want an apprentice building your house? They both know how to swing a hammer, or are they the same quality? That's something you got to ask yourself. And that's the exact question and things that the SMB is wrestling with. Now, say they can even afford the right talent. The second part of the equation that no one ever really gets into, and this is the part I absolutely love discussing with folks who are like, yeah, we want to hire a full-time CISO. Like, yeah, we can afford it. Great. So you've basically blown your budget on that one person. How do you retain them, right? As a professional, right? I worked at a Fortune 500. I worked at Pentagon. I've led major operations. I don't like to be bored, right? I'm a professional problem solver, and you will find most cybersecurity professionals are professional problem solvers. These people in this role do not want to be a lone man on the island, lone woman. They don't want to be the center of attention when anything happens. They don't want to own risk but not have the ability to actually address it. And they don't want to have to be able to solve something and just basically be the insurance. So think about a startup, right? You can probably bring them through a maturation of a program. Well, and then what? You're going to sit around, you're going to go look for your next job. So retention of this role becomes a huge concern for everybody outside the enterprise. It's not, everyone always just thinks it's just the money. It's not just the money. You have to keep these people, you have to bring them in. How long does it usually take to hire a CISO? Hitch Partners will tell you it'll take up to 6 months, sometimes 9 months, right? And then you got to retain them. You got to keep them interested. Are they going to be part of the senior leadership team, or do you just need them to do security? So why am I giving you all this background? It's because all of these concepts here, and the SMBs need to address this, is what has created the vCISO concept. It works. And here's why that concept works really well and why I believe it needs to be embraced by the SMB. It's because this role is a fractional role, which means it's a lower cost, okay? It is also ideally staffed by people who are
Brian, I think you froze.
lose me?
Oh, there you go. Okay, you're back.
Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on. You fractionalize the role. It's now it's attainable from a cost perspective. Okay, but the other piece is you are basically getting a managed service, and any managed service provider is not. They are not incentivized to ever leave, right? They want to retain you as the client. They want to stay there. So they're not thinking about getting another job because there's not enough to go do. Remember, maybe you're doing 20, 40, only 60 hours a month at that client. So you're not bored because you're not solving all the problems, but you're still executing on what's required. You're addressing cybersecurity. You have a model that they can both afford and retain the talent. And when you look at what is required for cybersecurity really over the long term, okay, it's not, okay, we did a risk assessment, right? And that's usually the first step that you that you tackle. But that's not the end of the journey, right? The risk assessment produces a gap analysis. That gap analysis produces a roadmap that you start working on. You start ticking off items. That takes time. No company is going to be able to just address all of the things that were found in day 1 or day 30. So you have to be able to create something that is over time. If you think about the model where the enterprise CISO, or, hey, I just can afford this one person, they're now a full-time resource in the SMB. They do this part and they get somewhere in here and then they look for another job, or for whatever reason they exit. And then we see that a lot. Now, what happens to that roadmap? Well, now that SMB is sitting there going, well, now I have to find and hire a new resource. That takes time, which means none of these actions are being addressed, right? So all of this kind of bubbles into like the vCISO, like, back to like the vCISO origin story. When I think about that role, right, and what is expected out of this is what you're solving for. And this is how you're trying to structure what you can deliver so that these groups outside of the enterprise space can all get the talent they need, retain the talent, and then it's not just the person and the role they're in, it's what they're doing. They are able to execute on an assessment and building a strategic roadmap and then manage it and govern it through its existence. So looking back at like, why does this role exist and like, how should it function? To me, that is the journey, right? That is the origin story of like how this needs to be looked at and embraced. And we're seeing, I mean, I can tell you from a client base, we're seeing that. And I'll kind of leave it on this. There's generally kind of 4, there's a 5th one, and I'll joke about it in a second, but there's really 4 reasons that anybody is looking to even build a cybersecurity program, which would lead them to bring in a CISO or a vCISO. 1, their board or their leadership is wise and actually looking for security leadership. They no longer want the CIO or the CTO to be in charge of that. In fact, the CIO or the CTO don't want to wear that as their second hat. Prime example for why you need and can look at vCISO as an option or fractional CISO as an option, right? Instead of saddling that with the CIO. So leadership's on board. That's great. We love that. We love that one. Bigger reason is regulatory requirements, right? You look at New York State Part 500, DFS Part 500 requires a CISO, can be outsourced. The FTC, the SEC is pushing forward naming and showing who security leadership is. Different regulations out there are demanding that. Well, if you're going to be in that space, and the enterprise companies are not the only ones that are regulated, right? Plenty of SMBs are. How do you shepherd that program and make sure that it is in place to address regulatory requirements? That's 2. Third one really is customer driven. I can't tell you how many clients we have because they have customers come to them and say, I'm not going to give you access to my data or my infrastructure, and I'm not going to give you any money that would be revenue to that organization. I'm not going to give you anything until you can prove to me what your security program looks like. So larger enterprises are becoming wise to their supply chain and third-party vendor risk management, of which smaller businesses are part of that supply chain. So now you've got this catalyst for SMBs going, well, if I want the revenue on this deal, I have to have a security program in place. So that becomes a really big one. The 4th one, actually, there's not a 5th. That's kind of the main 3, the positive 3 reasons. The 4th reason is the unfortunate one. You're right of boom. The digital janitors have come in and cleaned up the issue that has happened in your organization. You've had a breach, and you are sitting there post, dealing with insurance, post cleaning up, restoring whatever operations you could, and you sit there and go, okay, I don't want to go through that again. And a lot of organizations that we've seen outside the enterprise do not have anybody who is waking up and thinking about cybersecurity for that organization day to day. And generally, when we kind of pull back and do an after-action review and kind of pull back everything on, well, why did this incident happen in the first place? It's not always just, well, we didn't have this technology or that technology. Yeah, that's a part of it. But a bigger part is nobody was thinking about cybersecurity as a risk at an enterprise level. Everyone was just viewing it as an IT risk. And that's wrong to look at cyber as just an IT risk. It's more than that. It really is an enterprise risk. So that becomes kind of the 4th catalyst to why people want to build a program. And you have to kind of think about, well, who do I need to build a program, right? Do I want just an MSP to build my program, kind of bottom up? I can tell you that doesn't really work long term, right? Or do I need to embrace how regular, more mature organizations do it, but in a way that I can financially afford it and actually manage the talent according to my organization's culture and structure and everything. So kind of some high level stuff, but I figured I'd kind of end on that. But questions?
Yeah, that's terrific, Brian. Thank you so much. And, I love the way you distilled the complexity of all this, into something, as I said, people can get their heads around. And this is, a really good segue into what we've been, working on, because one of the gaps that exists is the talent. How do we identify who is a CISO? If I say, Gary Berman is a CISO and you believe me and you hire me, then I'm a CISO. So there's no equivalent of like a CPA for accounting, just as an example, even though certs, play an incredibly important role in the industry, as everyone knows. So, basically what we've been working on for about the last 6 months, very low key at the moment, is a 7-step plan to support the notion that Brian just laid out very, very well. And we're going to just quickly take you through them to be able to unleash the talent of the 75,000 or so people who qualify as CISOs or self-described. And our small contribution to that is, over the last 8 or so years since I've been in this crazy digital universe, I've been able to get about 24,000 connections with the highest level people in cybersecurity for I guess 2 reasons. One is I'm not a vendor, so I wasn't scary to people, and the second thing is I've been able to earn trust in a zero trust sort of ecosystem. And so we thought, okay, what can we do now to actually make things better for the industry and help? And so our sort of focus funnel is based on national security. Almost everyone in my world comes from that background, plus or minus, whether it be through the military or other government agencies and stuff. But we can't really do national security. But what about critical infrastructure? Well, there are 16 of them, and each one is giant. What if we focus on a couple of them? And what about even small to mid-sized businesses, as Brian laid out very well? There's still millions of targets for criminals. What about C-suites and boards? Which is what Chris is going to be talking about a little bit further in this whole notion of focusing, in some sort of fractional or vCISO way, and to be able to do this at scale. So it's a bit of an audacious, kind of, funnel, but it's what we're working on. And here's just a little bit of data from Richard Steinen of IT Harvest. And, basically he thought there were about 75,000 people who could sort of self-identify as CISOs. Again, not even knowing exactly what that means, but there is a big explosion in MSPs, MSSPs, who need talent, and the reason they need talent is because the potential demand, as Brian was just talking about. So we just picked out 3 CISA critical infrastructure sectors, essentially almost randomly, and you can see the map there about the number of potential virtual or fractional CISOs that Brian is talking about. And Brian laid out very well the problems and pitfalls and the challenges associated with that. But this is a big opportunity to come together as a community to do a better job to improve the risk postures of small to mid-sized businesses all over the country. And so Bob's going to take us through, some steps that we're working on at the moment. Would welcome your feedback, your participation. If you want to help us create this, that'd be great. So Bob?
Well, so let's just walk through these really quick. What we're trying to create here, and what we believe is needed, is sort of that ride share food service like service that provides vetted, skilled, and talented CISOs, and we do that by understanding what the CISOs can do, what their skills are, what their strengths and good points are, and matching that with what the needs are of the the client, that rural water district out there, or that rural healthcare organization. And to do this, what we're doing is essentially streamlining the selection process, and we're making it so that we can really scale the impact to the needs of the client with the skills of the CISO.
And on this slide, we want to point out Real CISO is the platform that Brian and his team have created. So we're partnering with Brian. Thank you for that opportunity, Brian, for making all this possible.
Okay.
Sorry,
we'll
my
go to the
mute,
next one.
my mute button was a little wet. Yeah, no, we're very excited to be able to help this whole endeavor out, and obviously just want to be able to figure out how to make things easier for both your guys' delivery as well as your client base. Having grown something but targeting a slightly different market.
Yeah. And so, Bob, you want to touch on this one?
So kind of going along the journey of the vCISO network, and part of our story is that we decided that we really need to be reducing the vCISO's risk, and they're exposed to a wide range of professional challenges and even legal liabilities out there today in this world. And I think that it's one of the things that we want to be able to do is be able to professionalize our group, but also reduce the risk to the CISOs themselves. Step forward, Gary.
Well said.
And then, of course, we need to optimize our own business development process. And one of that is sort of keeping that definitional link to the Cyber Hero network. And in fact, you can see one of the members on this panel today in her super cyberhero persona of Resilience Illuminara.
And George, so what was your experience like? Just sort of sharing your origin story, and what images to include and how you wanted to be portrayed or not. What was that like for you?
Well, in developing the comic book, it was a lot of fun. So I think I've done a lot of things in the cyber world, large spectrum of computer operations experience, and none of them are as cool as being able to point to a comic book and say, "Hey, look at me, I'm in a comic book." And I'll tell you, my family was also most impressed by that as well, because it actually brings the non-cyber folks into the cyber world, and they realize, oh, okay, this is something, and that's pretty cool and interesting. Whereas usually, whenever I talk to a family member or a non-cyber person, they start to kind of glaze over when I get into quantum technologies, artificial intelligence, what's going on with the latest cyber issue out there. So I thought it was a lot of fun going through the process of doing the comic book. It was interesting because I had to go through and submit a bunch of different photos of me from when I was younger to now, and I got to see it reflected. So it was really not so much what I don't think it was really focused a lot on what I did, but how I got there to do it. And I think, unlike a lot of people today, when people ask me, what did you do? How do I, kind of follow this path? It wasn't necessarily a well-known career field or path when I was taking it. So I sort of, I don't want to say fell into it, but I kind of fell into it and grew up with it. So there were no certifications, there were no mentors, there were no paths. So it was really just growing up with the industry, and the comic book kind of goes through and shows you that I just sort of ended up here. So it was a very direct.
Well, I mean, what you're saying also, forgive the interruption. Sorry, George. What you were saying also is true of almost everyone. There's no straight line path to this moment. Everybody has sort of this serpentine, very interesting, stops along the way to cybersecurity. So we're going to bring George in a little bit later in the show to talk about critical infrastructure and things that are going on in a macro sense in cybersecurity. So George, if you can stand by, thanks a lot. And we have just a couple more things here. Then we're going to hear from David Lawrence. who's going to talk to us that there's nothing new under the sun. So cybersecurity in biblical times, which I think should be quite engaging. So we'll be with you in just a minute, David. This is a little fun thing, like for our brand. Basically, it came up because, in hundreds of interviews I've done, very frequently dogs are barking in the background, or something. And, at first people are like embarrassed. Oh no, get away. So no, what kind of dog do you have? And they'll show me, on camera, and it unleashes, no pun intended, joy, and we said, okay, let's go with it. So this is Drog, a combination, as you see, drone and dog, and the last thing is we don't leave a mess. So it's an interesting sort of a branding kind of thing. It's not for everyone. We know that, but it will be for quite a few people, it seems. So Bob, multiplier.
So the thing that is important about our Cyber Hero vCISO network is we are getting that force multiplier effect. By the fact is, not one of us is not as smart as all of us together. And so the platform enables the vCISOs to quickly and efficiently find that colleague inside of the network that has done what they need to do if they haven't ever done it before. But the multiplier effect is the best ideas float to the top, and the best ideas are going to be put in front of our clients.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a very important concept in the military that everyone, is familiar with.
Right. And the other part of having a one of our vCISOs and in our concept is that we're not only providing them a service, we're also trying to upskill their organizations, not only the technical staff that they have, but also the leadership and the the managers and directors. We want to be able to have that client side effect, not just deliver a plan or simply deliver a service. That part of that service has got to be helping them up.
But I mean, said in another way, they don't know what they want, and they don't know what they need. Mm-hmm. You don't fault that. It's not a fault. It's just sort of the state of things. And so, I think this is a very unique thing of what we're looking to create, to be able to upskill clients at the same time, just to make the match between, these CISOs and then clients more likely to be successful.
Right. Absolutely. And the other part of this is, as we've said a couple of times here, optimizing time and money. The overall cost of keeping a executive on staff is tremendous. So we can help with that by providing the person who's going to do the work and the person that's going to have the insight and the reach back and the network multiplier swarm effect to serve the needs of the client and not overbreak the budget.
Yeah. And the other thing that we learned from listening and learning is everybody's stressed out, plus or minus. And it's lonely if someone's an individual consultant or small consultancy in cybersecurity. You can't really scale because you have to go ahead and get a client, then you have to stop and service them, and then rinse and repeat. And so one of our strategies go to market when we're ready to do so is with channel partnerships. Like with Brian and Real CISO and others and things like that. David, if you can turn your camera on, I can bring you into the stream. So let's welcome to the show David Lawrence. Hi, David.
Gary, Bob, Brian, how are you guys? Bob, I have to take issue with something you just said about the best ideas coming to the surface. In my experience, unfortunately, the best ideas don't necessarily come to the surface. It requires a little bit of what I'll refer to as luck, some serendipity, and a great marketing effort. So I'm glad you're doing what you're doing, because that's basically your exercise here, is trying to get a very, very good idea to the surface. Changing the equation. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Very well said. David, let me give a quick introduction of you. So I've known David for several years. He was the founder of an incredible network, RANE, the RANE network. And I don't want to mispronounce what it stands for. So, David, can you just make sure I get this right?
It's an acronym for Risk Assistance Network and Exchange. And
Indeed.
An outgrowth of just my fortuitous luck of being able to work for 10 years at the Justice Department, the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York, then 20 years at Goldman Sachs. But it's also a very familiar theme, as expressed today, of is there expertise and is there information that is not being accessed but is needed in the marketplace, and how to facilitate it, enable it, accelerate it. And that's what we're doing. Some people have described it as the business intelligence group, which I founded at Goldman Sachs, on steroids. So without being eliminated from the Olympics, Gary. So anyway.
Indeed. And so can you tell us a little bit about how many members you have, or, the kinds of things that you're working with?
Yeah, it's abroad. We have multiple hundreds of Fortune 500, 400 leading VC private equity firms. And we're particularly honored by participation involving leading government agencies, military branches, as well as not-for-profit and academic institutions, and a global network of expertise working broadly in the public interest.
And one of the things that I really love about your model is that you have, 4 areas of focus, geopolitics and so on, and cybersecurity is one of them, which is the context, and how we first, came together. Can you tell our audience, a little bit about how cybersecurity crosses everything you're doing, and then we want to hear your thoughts about biblical times.
Okay, so yes, I'm not. I guess I could have been ordained as a minister online before joining you guys, but I didn't. Look, what we're trying to explain is to demystify the issue of cybersecurity and cyber threats. You say cyber to people, and understandably, even the most sophisticated person thinks this is a technology problem in search of a technology solution. And I'm not a technologist. And therefore, I gotta take 2 steps back. I don't know what I can possibly add to the conversation or the dialogue, etc. And fortunately, I've been able to work with, collaborate with some incredible people that I've written articles with, principally for the Wharton Business Review on this issue and early. And I've had a chance to literally benefit from the thinking of former leadership out of the SEC, Jay Clayton, people like Jay Johnson, former head of Homeland Security, Tim Murphy, former deputy director of the FBI, who was an incredible individual, and many, many others. Jeff Brown, who led cybersecurity efforts for the city of New York. And so what we are trying to do is to understand this issue holistically. And it's interesting because you're talking about your network and experts. As you were speaking, I was reminded a little bit about the days long ago of this early days of the nation, when you didn't have a law enforcement community out there to protect people, and you had a process of deputizing people who would help safeguard ranches and farms and towns and villages and things like that. And so in some ways, I think about your network as being a network of deputies, people who are out there who actually know what they're doing. And because there are gaps in federal, state, and local enforcement, which we'll talk about in a moment, there is a need to have sort of a private network of deputies who go out and can hopefully prevent problems in the first instance, but are also available to respond when something occurs. So I hope you won't be insulted by that metaphor, but I very much think of what you're building as being a system of deputies who are qualified, who are acting in the best interest, almost as stewards or fiduciaries for people who are in need because the gaps are current gaps in enforcement and prevention.
You know, just to build on that quick point, and then we'll go to biblical times. One of the first real life cyber heroes or deputies, so to speak, was a guy I met at the very first conference I ever went to in cybersecurity. It was on Wall Street, and he was the very high up in security at Samsung. And he kind of ran the FBI Samsung program and stuff. And so I told him a little bit about sort of my story, you know, and how I got to that conference. He started telling me his story that he always wanted to be an FBI agent. You're talking about deputies.
Yeah.
And his dad was a very big spokesperson for the FBI. Whenever there was a plane crash or some big thing where they would go on camera, his dad would do it. So he wanted to follow in his footsteps. He went on to tell me that right before he was going to take the physical of the FBI, he broke his knee playing basketball, and therefore was never able to become an FBI agent. That's how he got into cybersecurity. So real quickly, he and his chief engineer came to my house to help me out, and I decided to create his origin story inside a comic, and we call him Special Agent K, because his name is Keith, right. Keith Fuentes. And we created this cool character in law enforcement with a badge and everything, was like a deputy. I mean, it's exactly what you just said. When I showed it to him, he started bawling. I mean, it was the most beautiful moment because he finally realized his dream, if
That's
at least
great.
in comic form. So anyways, tell us about the Bible.
Listen, I have to digress one more second. Are you guys familiar with the company called Webtoon? WEBTOON. Okay, it's an Asian-based company that is just going public, and it's built upon a community of graphic artists who create comics online.
Oh, wow!
And there's an extraordinary following. Obviously, there's a bit of an age gap in terms of, you know, collectors of comics can be, you know, people are respective ages, but this is a very vibrant and young community that is used to reading online. So we'll have a separate conversation. But
yeah, great.
In terms of your superheroes, I want to talk to you about Webtoon because I think I did some quick research. They announced today. I think they're going public today, for that matter. Okay, so
wow.
It's very. I think there could be some opportunities. In any event, let me go back to part of our mission at RANE and why we write and collaborate, and I'll mention to you before the term cybersecurity or cyber threats were even coined. I had the great advantage because of my relationships to invite Mike Chertoff and General Hayden up to Goldman Sachs to speak. And I benefited from working with Mike way back when we were both at the U.S. Attorney's Office together. By way of disclaimer, Mike has 100 IQ points on me, so I, simply knew enough to always be listening to Mike. But obviously, he had General Hayden, senior leadership in the intel community, and Mike being Homeland Security and such. And we had a conversation about what they were just out of government, what they were seeing as looming threats in the digital world. Okay, cybersecurity was forget being an industry, forget being an occupation, forget being a headline. It wasn't even a term. Okay.
Wow.
And they came up and were very generous in just in terms of having a conversation about what they felt was coming. And obviously, we're not divulging any kind of confidential information, but they were sharing sort of what they saw on the horizon and what enterprises had to be prepared for. And by the way, many of their insights shared, obviously, with our mutual friend, Phil Venables, et cetera. So I bring this up because, and you referenced it's, the geopolitical aspects. What I have found to be very helpful is to, I'll call it disaggregate, to simplify, to break down what cyber threats are and what's really involved in cybersecurity. And you alluded to this. You talked about mid-sized and small companies and ranches and farms. And one way to think about this is that we are collectively only as strong as our weakest link. Okay? That
Yeah.
unlike, I'm here in New York City. Bob, I don't know where you're based out of, but I know Gary's down in the Florida area. As a citizen of New York, I know I can call 911. I know my neighbors, et cetera. Everybody sort of has, I'll call it equality of protection when it comes to crimes that are on the books. Okay. And unfortunately, when it comes to running a business or your own personal life, digital products have been pushed out. They've been encouraged. They've been influenced. In fact, they're now a necessity. I don't think there's anyone who would say that it is not necessary to be connected in today's world. Okay. You're at a distinct disadvantage, whether it's from an educational standpoint, whether it's from a community standpoint, a connectivity standpoint, financial standpoint, political standpoint, whatever. If you are not connected, if you are not there, you are at a disadvantage. But what has failed to occur is sort of a leveling and keeping up with the traditional security and protection and response that we have for everything else. And what I like to remind people, I'm sort of a broken record at this point, but if you think about what institutions, individuals, our government agencies, our law enforcement community requires is a level set that we all understand that we are facing the same issues we faced, and I said, going back to biblical times, where we have an enforcement system, a judicial system, we have treaties, we have mutual treaties, we have extradition treaties, etc. And I find it helpful in speaking to people just to remind them about what are the threats that we face as a result of our digital world and our digital connectivity. And the fact that we have not, from a regulatory standpoint, law enforcement, national security, unfortunately, with the pace of change and the pace in which products come out, we have not been able to keep pace. So I would, if I can just offer this as a little bit of a Jeopardy style quiz, you can tell me if I've left anything out, but the crimes that we face, the concerns we have from cybersecurity, again, go back to the biblical days. We have fraud, we have theft, we have blackmail, we have bribery, we have espionage, we have sabotage, we have disinformation campaigns, we have extortion, we have kidnapping and ransom, and by that I mean, obviously, of our data. And the sources of our threats are really no less familiar, and indeed are rooted, in biblical times. You have your individual criminals, you have your small crime groups, you have organized crime groups, you have your nation state actors, your generally your competitors.
Wow.
And
well, one of the things, forgive the interruption, I just want to say one thing, David.
Yeah.
When you first tell me about this, I didn't know what to think. Like, oh, okay, well, things have gotten better, or are things just the same? And you quoted, I'm not sure what book it was, but like, there's nothing new under the sun.
Gary, I'll send you a Bible from the Gideons.
Okay. When you said there's nothing new under the sun, my head just exploded, because if you just even take it to like modern times, let's say 20 years of cybersecurity, it's the same stuff, just sort of recycled, and the attack vectors are slightly different, or the terms, but it really is, the same stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, and what is altered here is the number one, the degree for actors to operate with anonymity and impunity. All right. So if I want to steal your records, I don't have to arrive on your shores, sneak into the city, break into your offices, rifle through the files. It's funny. I am a sort of a fan of, we'll call it spy novels and movies and stuff. But it is absolutely quaint to watch some of the old James Bond movies as Sean Connery takes out a small camera and begins to photograph things, right? Separate confidential files, and then quickly hide his camera and be able to return with the photographs. But look, the ability to operate with impunity, with anonymity, there are low barriers of entry for everyone to play this game. You only have to hit it once. You can try 1,000 times. Very few people are caught, no less extradited and prosecuted. The costs of entry, what you can buy through the dark web in terms of data and tools, that is what has changed. That is what's accelerated, has scaled, and we have protected class. But the underlying nature of what is occurring here is as old as biblical times, and we have not kept up. And what your platform is speaking in volumes is that we haven't provided our people with the necessary means for protection, detection, and response.
Yeah, well said. And with that in mind, you had mentioned earlier the SEC and Mr. Clayton. Chris Hetner, your video is not on, so as soon as you can turn it on, I'll bring you into the stream, because that will be a good segue to talk about boards and C-level challenges, because as I mentioned earlier in my introduction, Chris was a cybersecurity guy for the SEC and has had a long and pretty illustrious career in this space. So Chris, first of all, do you know David?
No, we now know each other virtually, Chris.
We now know each other virtually.
Yeah.
And I suspect he's from New York, and so am I. So we could probably meet up in person.
That'd be great. And by the way, if you had a chance to work for Jay Clayton, I'll put him in the category of someone else. There are a lot of people out there, Gary, who have 100 IQ points on me, but Jay is certainly one, and was always a very honest broker and well ahead of his time in sharing his concerns around this issue.
Well, let me now turn it over to you, Chris. And David, if you want to hang out, I can leave you in the stream, or would you need to run?
You have my attention, Gary, and I'd love to hear what Chris has to say.
Okay. And George also.
Great. Yep.
We have a couple more. Great. What a privilege for me. Anyways, Chris, so the floor is yours.
Yeah, no, thank you, Gary. Nice to meet everyone. Nice to meet you, David. So been in the cyber arena for just about 3 decades, probably aging myself. I started studying the intersection between technology, use of computer systems, and criminal behavior at John Jay College Criminal Justice. I was kind of pre-law enforcement, pre-FBI, and decided to stick with the traditional technology path. So I built and operated security operations data centers back in the 90s, early 2000s. Took a role at Citigroup, ran their corporate investment bank, capital markets, technology, risk management, cybersecurity division. Global chief information security officer at GE Capital. We were a $500 billion bank, 120,000 employees, distributed over 60 countries. And I was named as their CISO to kind of bring more of a unified construct around how we were going to be regulated, quite honestly, by the Federal Reserve Bank.
Chris, forgive the interruption. Sorry, there's a bit of feedback somewhere. If everyone else can just mute their StreamYard just temporarily, see if that solves the problem. Let's see.
Yeah, I don't think I.
Yeah, that's better. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, and then after losing my hair as a CISO, I decided to go into management consulting and spent just over 2 years at EY. And I was exposed to the U.S. securities market because most of my clients were wealth asset management, traditional investment advisors, big hedge fund, private equity firms. And a unique opportunity surfaced to go serve as a senior advisor to the executive branch of the U.S. government. So I was named under both Mary Jo White as senior cybersecurity advisor to the SEC chair, And when Jay Clayton was confirmed, he asked me to continue to remain, because I said, listen, guys, you got me for 5 years. I'm walking away from a Wall Street salary to .gov, clearly taking a pay cut. Yeah, I live in New York, got a place in Westchester down the Jersey Shore. So anyway, so Jay is a dear friend. Under Jay's tenure, the role grew outside of the SEC, and I started to work with the U.S. Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, as well as his Deputy Assistant Secretary, Dave Lackamont, who is a 2-star general through the Cyber Command, U.S. Army, and essentially represented the U.S. financial markets and securities markets and through the G7 countries as a cyber expert, but really more about how do we drive business, financial, operational resiliency across the capital markets as it relates to cyber threats or traditional technology exposures. And fast forward to today, I'm back in the private sector. I was named as cyber security advisor to the National Association of Corporate Directors, NACD. We've got a portfolio of about 24,000 members. And most of what I do now is advise direct boards of directors, corporate directors. We work with CEOs. We work with law firms on bringing cybersecurity up the value chain. We also provide training and awareness with our members. We have a certification program with Carnegie Mellon. So we're trying to, and it's an uphill battle, to be quite frank with everyone, to arm the board with how cyber, and I've even broadening it beyond cyber, how digital exposure, because you've got to capture AI, you've got to capture supply chain, you've got to capture cloud computing, and obviously the threat activity continues to mount. But it's really stressing the corporation's balance sheets. It's stressing the cost associated with response, deployment of capital and resources. It's now creating liabilities with the CISO community as well as the directors and officers. And so we're offering our boardroom community with awareness. We offer certifications. I was just down in Washington last week at the U.S. Secret Service training facility. We had a cohort of about 16 corporate directors, and we trained them on all facets of cyber, everything from top line governance principles, what's the right level of reporting to the board, all the way down to some of the interesting investigations that's being run by the Secret Service. And part of that program that we developed 2 years ago was offering our boardroom community more of a business, operational, financial, contextualized view as to how the cyber threat would specifically impact that business. Because we work with, obviously, we're not exclusive to financial services. We operate across the 16 critical sectors, but we broadened it out a bit to the 23 NAICS codes, which is how the insurance markets calculate and price cyber risk. So we work with our boardroom to project an annual loss expectancy as to where those most likely threats can occur, based on some historical data, but also based on macro cyber economics. And we've offered this platform to our boardroom community. We've got a couple hundred companies now using it. We help to align to the SEC disclosure requirements now, because now you've got both, if an incident were to occur, there's qualitative components to that, such as, reputational brand. You've got to get the CEO and the media, holy crap, we just lost, 5 million records. But there's also the quantitative component, which is really about, what was its impact on, the company's balance sheet? How much of this, what I call, when I advise CEOs, I mean, some of the CEOs and board members, there's technical proficiency, and obviously is very accomplished individuals, but I try to distill it down to language they understand. So I call it, what type of barbell did we accumulate as a result of this cyber event? How much is this thing going to cost me? We worked with MGM, for instance. They had a ransomware event last fall. We helped calibrate between the CISO, CFO, general counsel, and CEO. Eventually got to him. What is this thing going to cost us? They came out, I think it was a public statement. It was like 120 million. The systems were down. The gaming platforms were down. The online reservation systems were down. But guess what? if you really step back, 120 million compared to a $16 billion company, that's 0.6% of top line revenue. And he also had a $200 million limit on the insurance policy. And then just the first quarter this year, they had record earnings. So what we're trying to do is distill down the hair and fire, the chaos that usually occurs within the cybersecurity ecosystem, and distill down the core business principles that are well understood, actionable by the executive suite. And so that's been a mission of ours now, since I've been technically since I was at the SEC. That was the formation and foundational principles behind some of these rules and regulations. I said to Jay, and this is like the whole commission and corporate finance division, as you want to move the needle on cyber, you make this the CFO, the general counsel, and the CEO accountable. That's how you're going to move the needle. The CISO is there to execute on behalf of the business and advise on, various types of policies and principles. And so, I'm a big proponent of shifting that accountability upstream. Unless, look, there's going to be some technologists and CISOs or whoever that might be malicious or might have done fraud. But, like I was with Joe Sullivan 3 weeks ago at a CXO conference in Detroit. He did a beautiful talk on his journey being prosecuted by the U.S. government. And a pivotal point in that discussion was like towards the tail end of his case, the judge made a very simple observation. Where the hell is the CEO in this courtroom? Why isn't the CEO here? Yeah. So that's my mission, to bring the liability upstream, shield the CISO, and enable the CISO to be more conversant. And look, not all of us are created equal. I came from a technology background. I was a Cisco gearhead. I had to step out of my comfort zone to really understand the business. And now I'm largely operating, with corporate directors. I also work in the private equity community and the VC community. I advise a $1 billion fund here in New York on AI. And so I've kind of shifted more towards the economics, financial side. But if you're a CISO that's not comfortable shifting that direction, then I counsel CISOs, create relationships with your enterprise risk management executives, whether it be your general counsel, your CFO, chief compliance officer, and create that team support that's so needed. So,
indeed, other than that, nothing going on. So what you mentioned, a number of really important things. One of which is I'm going to bring to the show George Shea further, because you talked about critical infrastructure and financial services. Clearly is, I don't know if it's the top one, but maybe healthcare, I guess.
Right.
But critical infrastructure. So George, what's your impression from your kind of unique perch? Being on the leading edge of cybersecurity and artificial intelligence, what's your impression of sort of collectively America's efforts to protect critical infrastructure at the moment?
Well, I find that, as a policy is one of the slowest things that you're going to encounter. So it used to be, decades ago, I would say things like we need a cyber Pearl Harbor before something actually takes place. And then it became a cyber 9/11 before something takes place. And now we're seeing some, not quite the full-blown worst day scenario type things, but we're seeing things like the impacts of Stuxnet, the impacts of NotPetya, the potential impacts of Volt Typhoon. So we're now seeing action, and that action is directly promoting policy. So I would say this year alone, there's been a tremendous movement in the effort to push policy for resilience of critical infrastructure, improving critical infrastructure. And I'll start with the PCAST report that was published in February. It was the Presidential Council of Advisors for Science and Technology report on how to ensure resilience of cyber physical systems. They identified 4 very high level recommendations to address cybersecurity, but really look beyond cybersecurity and push for resilience. So regardless if your systems are compromised, you can still meet the mission. You can still produce whatever it is you're producing, services, products. You can still continue business as usual. And speaking of which, I want to bring up a point with Brian had said earlier about the small and medium-sized businesses being subjected to cyber attacks. I think it's important for people to realize and understand that of all the statistics, 50% of small and medium-sized businesses are subject to cyber attacks. Of those victims, 60% go out of business. So when you're in that small, medium-sized business and you're looking at how do I grow my business, there's a really great chance you're going to go bankrupt if you haven't pre-positioned yourself to be pro cybersecurity, and you think, oh, I'll get to it later. Well, that might be too late. So I just want to throw that in. And so back on the policy side, I mentioned the PCAS report, which I'm very excited about. I was actually one of the participating working group members that was able to go through, talk to various experts, government organizations, look at the state of critical infrastructure, what needs to be improved. And from that, I believe it influenced, and now we saw a lot of great policy changes in the National Security Memorandum 22 that came out in, I think it was April, on critical infrastructure, which identifies the president's direction on what different organizations will be doing, what the different sectors of critical infrastructure are, where they need to focus. And I saw, in the PCAS report, in the National Security Memorandum, a big focus on public-private partnerships amongst both of these. And they also mentioned that the Homeland Security recently put out their strategy for improving critical infrastructure, security, and resilience as well, not too long ago. I think it was about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, a couple weeks ago.
Let me, George, forgive the interruption. I just want to build on a point. I can tell you firsthand, this was an outstanding report and recommendations. George was kind enough to invite me to the event, and it was amazing to hear all these thought leaders. And one of the things that I took away from that the panel discussion was that up until recently, I'll use that just generally, there was not enough investment in terms of people and then budget across the 16 critical infrastructure sectors to actually interact with the private sector. And I forget the name, but it was like you have sector leader.
Sector risk management agencies, the SRMAs.
Yeah, so there's one for each of these at the moment, 16 critical infrastructure sectors. How would you assess? And I know there's been a big budget allocation, but it doesn't take into effect until maybe a year or two from now, I think. Is that
right? So I'll go back to what I first said. Policy is one of the slowest things you're going to encounter. So you definitely have the speed of technology, speed of innovation, speed of motivation amongst criminals. That they're not waiting on anything. Policy takes a lot longer. And so, policies being developed and put out there, and we'll see some changes. So that's very positive and exciting. As for the sector risk management agencies, there's, as you said, 16 sectors of critical infrastructure. You've got your defense industrial base, your manufacturing, your water, your energy, healthcare, finance. I'm not going to name them all, but each one of those is a bit different. They're unique in their own ways. They have various resource and capabilities. So cyber's not equal throughout all of our critical infrastructure. When you look at the defense industrial base, I would say that's the greatest place to be for cyber protection, because there's a whole budget for it. You don't really think about money. You can throw money at tools. You can have pilot programs. You can have projects. You can, really find the technologies and processes that rise to the top. But when you're in other sectors, you are probably more than likely privately owned. Most of critical infrastructure is privately owned. So they don't have that, huge pot of money to look at for cyber. Whenever they put money, every dollar put into cyber is a dollar taken away from, their profit, what they're paying their employees, what they're doing to build their business, other risks that they have. So cyber becomes a very difficult thing in the private sector, because you have to, as the CISO, quantify that risk to your CEO, and there are no guarantees. So you could go to your CEO and say, I need $1 million to put these protections in, and hopefully we'll just maintain where we are. So there's not a lot of return on investment that you can go back and say, look what we did. We weren't compromised. And then even if you are compromised, you're like, well, we did spend all this money. We were compromised. You can be compromised no matter how much money you spend. So it's a very difficult area to, put the resources in and allocate it. And in that private sector, it's really based on the motivation and education of those leaders that they have there.
Yeah, and we're going to now have an open discussion with all of our panelists and bring in some other folks who want to ask questions. And Chris, you should, bells should be ringing in your, mind about what you just heard from George about the challenges, of justifying the spend. And from the previous conversation that you and I had, you have a tool that is designed, at least in part, to rationalize expenditures. Did I get that right?
Yeah. So I agree with the assessment, and it's pretty evident that the DIB has the unlimited spend as they should, as pertains to cybersecurity type of tooling, investments, financial services. I peg them as a number 2 potentially to the DIB. But even within financial services, to be honest with you, like outside of the significantly important financial institutions, some of the financial market utilities that clear and settle trillions of dollars a year, perhaps even the top 30 banks. Like, we work with a lot of community banks, mid-tier banks, and the budget really flattens out, falls apart very quickly. So all these institutions aren't created equal. And then as you get to the SMB market, it even gets more severe in terms of fighting for budget allocation. Some of these companies, even in the mid-market, could be publicly traded. And I think the last number I read for the U.S. public markets, I think there's close to like 5,000 publicly traded companies. But in working with the top-end enterprises, the mid-tier and the low-end enterprises, as you kind of move down the stack, budget allocation is very very challenging. And working with audit committee chairs and CFOs, there's a lot of fatigue in terms of how that money is being spent. So in other words, Q1, the CISO asked, hey, I need another $10 million budget. Q2, they go back to the trough. I need another $10 million budget. And the question is, where is that money being spent? Are we deploying that capital to business risk reducing areas? And it's not a comfortable conversation between the CISO, CTO, CIO, and the CFO. And
but do you have a system? You have a software platform?
So that's part of our analytics platform. So we show where capital should be deployed to de-risk the company in a material way. Let's face it, let's be honest with ourselves as CISOs and cybersecurity folks, we're not financial experts. We're largely disconnected with the business. And therefore, we're trying to enable the CISO, the CTO, the technology organization with the right types of analytics to say, here's where you should start deploying your capital in order to reduce that exposure in a material risk reducing way, tied to business reducing exposure. So that's one of the platforms that we've chosen for our NACD membership to help navigate the muddy waters of allocation of capital and where should you allocate that capital in a risk reducing way. And I think it might have included in the chat there the NACD cyber risk reporting platform.
We'll make sure that when we in post edit that we'll include links to all of your information for each of you if you want to have our audience go check out more information for sure.
And here's a link to another platform. I mean, we try not to lead in with tooling. There's no shortage of tools in the marketplace, but we've selected a platform that is been used by the insurance markets to help price projected losses on cyber. And the reason why we've chosen that approach, while it's not perfect, it ties back to an actuarial approach that's been regulated, that's been tested. And through our studies, through the NACD, like we spin up all of these various types of working groups. We've looked at the various markets and we've realized that the risk transfer markets, eventually you're going to solve for safety measures. We're already starting to see that. If you have a cloud instance and you don't have MFA deployed and the insurance carrier gets wind of that, you're probably not going to get an optimized policy in terms of coverage. So working with the risk transfer markets using this type of approach has been very effective. And we've got big private equity firms such as Vista Equity, Carlyle Group using it across their portfolio companies. We've got MGM using this for SEC reporting. We're working with law firms, and so it's a fairly baked and developed capability that's now kind of helping navigate the muddy waters of where to deploy capital.
Okay, thanks. We'll make sure everyone is aware of this. So I wanted to invite one of our members, Jim McConnell. Hey, Jim, how you doing?
Great, awesome.
So you've been listening to this conversation. What are some of your key takeaways so far, or what would you like to contribute, or questions? And then David, I know you had a question, and we're going to just close by having a free-flowing discussion.
Yeah, thanks. No, as always with audiences like this and speakers like this, we're all a perspective. Does it fit? Does everything we say fit in everybody's organization? Whether you're Billy Bob the plumber, with just trying to make it, all the way up to large, massive enterprises or government, or even in the NGO world, where I do a lot of pro bono work. Does this stuff work? As I tell people, it works from the church house to the White House. And so it's great. It's been I've been taking so many notes and linking up and networking behind the scenes. So I encourage all the audience to network with us. And I think what this is kicking off is a great discussion for folks to be able to understand. There's a wide variety of aspects to this thing. Just ended up there talking about metrics and quantification. An area near and dear to my heart around how do we do things like metrics, again, from the church house to the White House to improve security. So great stuff.
Yeah, well, thanks. And Jim is very, he puts his time where his mouth is. He's does a lot of work volunteering for church organizations to help protect them regarding cybersecurity, which is great. David, you had a question or comment for Chris? You're muted at the moment.
Actually, both Chris and George. There's a little bit of an elephant in the room. I'm seizing upon Chris's comment about escalating it up, and part of his mission is to, I'll use the term, insulate or make it very clear that being the CTO has limitations, that there are other people within an organization that have to bear responsibility and allocation and their tools. Just to bring back there's nothing new under the sun. And I wrote with various experts. There was a time when, back in the early days of colonies, there was no fire department. And Ben Franklin had an idea. He witnessed something about how a fire in one building could quickly spread to another structure and another, and the need for a communal fire department. We presently don't have that. You're sort of, building that informally, you and Bob and such. But what that also yielded was a fire code, and the notion that if you're going to borrow money for a structure from a bank, you had to, basically comply with certain fire requirements, and you had to contribute a little bit to the communal fire department, and it evolved. And I kind of feel we're still at that stage. But the elephant in the room, I just want to throw out there for Chris and George, I'd love to hear your views. As we talk about pushing this up, whether it's up internally in the chain of command, I can't help, and George, your comment about the mid-sized and small businesses, and 60% of them go out of business as a result of these attacks. This is a very significant national security, I'll call it national economic risk here that we're all enduring. And you have FBI Director Chris Wray going on essentially a roadshow to talk about his concerns about never seen such a high level of threats to our infrastructure. You're seeing our leading government agencies be no less vulnerable to these things. And I think that there's a fundamental question that has been overlooked. And by the way, George, I saw with the Infrastructure Act, New York State Governor Hochul made an announcement. We got $6 million of the infrastructure funds to help sustain New York State's infrastructure and various communities. And that, of course, Chris would say is, thanks for a few breadcrumbs.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. What am I going to do with that, right?
And right now, I still think, and this has been the impediment, and maybe Gary, this network can help break this. I can't help but feel that we're still at the stage where we have ignored the fact that we don't have a national response on the law enforcement, regulatory, and intelligence community that is been able to, or that is protecting us. This cannot be, right now we're still blaming the victims. If you are attacked, as Chris is saying, we have criminal trials involving people who worked at companies, were trying to do the right thing, but nonetheless were victimized. And if I see the leading government agencies and military branches being susceptible to these threats, I wonder, how can the rest of us possibly deal with this? And I appreciate resiliency versus prevention and detection. I get all that. But I think there's a fundamental question that has to be asked, which is, why do we not have that national response to protect all our citizens, our enterprises? And if we're going to push this up, Chris, shouldn't it be at that level, noting who the threat actors are and the technologies involved, and et cetera? And I'll just say, and I'm watching the current political environment carefully, and let's get past the noise. I haven't heard any of the candidates talk about cybersecurity, cyber threats, and the need for a national response. And this is not the first national election cycle. This should have taken place 2 cycles ago. So I'd love to hear, maybe from everyone, but certainly Chris and George, in light of their comments, how they're thinking about this, and how do we get this pushed up?
I'll take a swing at it. I've given this some thought, my time in government and working with CISA on evaluating how to drive right investments across critical infrastructure. And, good, better, and different. The reality is that it's largely owned and operated by the private sector, and the private sector is incentivized by profit and loss. It's, creating incentives and growth through their shareholders and investors, and therefore, cybersecurity and technology resiliency is it's a cost. It's a cost doing business, and so we need, as a community, to do a better job at articulating what those fundamental costs should be if you're going to plug into the internet, if you're going to deploy an AI platform, if you're going to deploy your ERP system to the cloud, if you're going to connect your water treatment plant to the internet. Like, there are consequences and there are safety measures that should be deployed. But guess what? That's going to cost money. And to your point, $6 million, I mean, that's a drop in the bucket. What are you going to do with $6 million? Part of my work is with municipalities across the United States. And it's really unfortunate because we're seeing a tremendous amount of ransomware targeting these municipalities. Suffolk County was notable. It was about 1.5 years ago. They were down for 6 months. They had their 911 systems crashed. They couldn't access criminal records. They couldn't prosecute people. Payroll systems. I mean, these systems are completely out. One of the areas that I suggested, advised to CISA, this was about 18 months ago, and a lot of this is based on some of the work we do with the NACD around our analytics. Why can't we take some of our trending data to look at where the losses are occurring? What are the top 5 or 6 areas? Pick top 5, right? Let's not get crazy. That introducing material business operational harm to these critical sectors, and bring some guidance to these critical sector owners and operators, including their boards of directors, to here are the areas that you really should invest in, right? But unfortunately, I haven't really seen CISA kind of make that leap. They do a very good job at providing, technical data, TTPs, mitigation strategies. But guess where those are going? They're going into the proverbial data center. They're going into the basement of the company. They're not getting upstream to the board. So I've laid out a whole strategy for them to bring this up and even bring it up to Congress and other leaders in the U.S. government to say, hey, we've got water treatment as a sector, critical infrastructure, and because of all these OT exposure, again I'm making up, because of all these OT exposures, to remediate this thing, it's going to cost about $5 billion. Where are we going to get that money? Like, it needs to get down to those brass taxes, and we're not having those conversations.
So, Chris, let me just, if I can, Gary, I just want to push, because this is a thesis that we urge upon the clients, okay? At a time when we are having these strong debates that may ultimately swing the election about our border security, there is a certain irony about the porousness of our digital borders, right? And what's happening, and the threats, and the nature of the financial losses. And yet there is a disconnect between our physical world and our digital world. And yet it's the same. I would say it's just the other side of the same coin. So Chris, if we had people going around the country who were compromising our water security, what the response would be, right?
Right.
You absolutely would know. And similarly, I would like to suggest we're in a stage, and I'm not saying this is purposeful, but where political leadership, we're still at a stage where we're blaming the victims. And I likened it in some of the writings to the way we used to treat, and I guess, and still do, unfortunately, sexual assaults. That the person was in the wrong neighborhood, didn't protect him or herself, was dressed too attractively, and didn't fight hard enough against the assailant. And I just find it is not productive to continue to look at businesses and find fault and exclusions from insurance. There has to be a national unified response, which of course, Gary, quite frankly, includes deputizing people, right? Deputizing people who can go out there and work. But this has not gotten enough national attention, and they haven't applied, in my view, the traditional lenses of law enforcement and terrorism and national security to the problem.
So I'll jump in real quick. So what you asked was a pretty, I'd say, broad question. What is the national response? So it also becomes very complex. So it kind of depends. I mean, what are the looking at the various authorities of different organizations? There's pockets of people who do respond, pockets of organizations that respond based on what the threat is. Is this a nation state attacking an organization? Is this a local hacker attacking something? So there's different responses and different authorities for different situations. There's also as Chris just said, a large part of our critical infrastructure is privately owned. So what are they tracking? What are they seeing? What are they reporting? We just recently, in the past couple of years, have the national incident reporting. So now organizations under critical infrastructure need to report those incidents, and they're having a problem with that. So if you're talking about a response, locking down the internet, going in and protecting their systems, there's a level of I know you don't want to hear, but a level of responsibility of those organizations that they need to be taking. There's also a responsibility with the government to identify what the best practices are, but then there's always the new and emerging threat, and there's always that porous growing. We're seeing different types of things out there. I will point out that there is not a I guess a whole picture of what's going on. There's a lot of fractional pockets of response. And in the National Security Memorandum that came out in April that replaces the PPD 21, it calls for the establishment of a national coordinator amongst the sector risk management agencies, so we can start to see what is going on, how do we coordinate that, and then how can we move forward from that. But right now it is very I would say, partition, and it's not getting full view.
Right.
And there's also in there a call for incentives to the private industry as well. It doesn't go into great detail about what kind of incentives, but grants, other type of incentives, so that companies can start to bring along the cybersecurity to the standard that it needs to be at.
You know, one of the things. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just going to emphasize and double down on George's comments. Some of this is just the company, the entity's responsibility. It's basic hygiene practices. It's tending to the garden. It's making sure that you have the right patches. It's deploying multi-factor authentication. It's doubling down on training and awareness. And by the way, last year when we do an annual roll-up of all of our incidents that we see across the NAICS codes across the insurance markets, 70% of the incidents were introduced by supply chain exposure. So are we tending to our suppliers? I mean, look, the automotive industry they took a wide hit because of CDK. 20,000 dealerships aren't able to process loans and execute sales on vehicles. So I think of this as low-hanging fruit. And look, the adversaries, we say they're sophisticated, they're always tapping into us, but let's face it, they're looking for low-hanging fruit.
Right, and not just that. I want to dovetail this back into the point of this conference right now, the virtual CISO, fractional CISO. A lot of these small and medium-sized companies, if your job isn't cyber, then that's not where you're putting your money and your resources. Your job is something else. Your job is not just to ensure the organization is secure; it's to produce something. So in these different organizations that don't have a CISO, there's a difference between a CISO and your IT director. Your IT director or the person who's leading the cyber efforts is going to pretty much be compliant. Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I ready for the audit? Am I doing everything that I'm legally required to? But when you have the CISO within your organization, it's more on the horizon. What are the broader threats? What are the different communities that you can interact with? Are you participating with your ISAC, your utilities ISAC, your K through 12 ISAC, your OT ISAC, whatever that group is? So you not only look at the compliance piece and ensure that's happening, but you're also looking at the emerging threats. You're looking at the resilience of your organization. You're looking at your business impact assessment, and you're tying it to what you're doing for cybersecurity to ensure that you go beyond the audit. You can continue business in the face of some type of cyber attack. So I think that's
Jim, forgive the interruption. Jim, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously Chris and George has got significantly more experience in this, in the Beltway areas. But David, I think that, my contribution was, strangely enough, when I was writing my book on security metrics, I wrote a chapter. Hey, here's Congress. Here's 25 metrics you can start asking for. And so gave them so I did an open letter to Congress. I've done, I wrote to my local House of Representative, and I created a funny chart, funny background back there. But ultimately what I have found, David, is, and obviously I worked in critical infrastructure for the last 28 years. But sometimes it's, how do we measure this thing? And so, hey, Congress, can we start to have some of those fancy boards of graphics that you put up all the time at a congressional meeting? Let's start putting up some metrics about the security of the different agencies across the industry, across government, and industry's got to do the same thing. But as I say in my talks a lot around metrics, red is bad, green is good. And we start laying out all of the different departments of the government and showing all the red slices of pie charts. Sometimes this is not hard, but sometimes it's got to be visual to start really having an impact. And so, David, back to your point, I think that one piece of the solution is Congress themselves being measured, and of course all of the agencies across the rest of the government being measured and compared to each other. I think you're going to have a healthy conversation around those things. But just an idea.
I think you're going to have a lot of. I think you're going to have a lot of C- report cards out there when you start doing that.
Yeah, to put it mildly. So as we're beginning to wrap up, Bob, I just wanted to check. Do you want me to show your last slide before
Yeah,
we're
let's
done?
go ahead and put
Wait,
that one up.
not yet. I'll
When
do
you're
that.
ready.
Yeah, I just wanted to check. So just a couple sort of requests for your thinking and your advice. George, you've been an advisor, to the Cyber Hero vCISO network, just about since we began, and you've been incredibly generous with your time and effort in introducing us to just one amazing person after another. Why are you doing it?
Because I see the need for fractional CISOs, virtual CISOs within industry. It is a large C-suite position that a lot of companies can't afford. But if they realize and understand, you don't have to bring on a full-time, full salary person, but you can do this part-time, fractionally with someone. It'll give them the guidance and direction they may need. And one of the other things I really love about what you're doing is that it's a group of experienced CISOs from various sectors of critical infrastructure. And so you find within the different sectors, there's going back to the compliance, different compliance things that they need to follow. So if you're in the healthcare sector, you're really looking at HIPAA. If you're in the defense industrial base, you're looking at CMMC and you're looking at RMF. If you're in the retail industry, what's going on with your PCI. So you could be in this field your entire career and never really understand another sector, the NERC FERC SIP requirements, for example, if you're from the DIB. But by bringing these different experts together, these different CISOs, you've created this cross training capability, so you can phone a friend. Like I'm very familiar with this sector, but I'd like to know more about how this other sector is doing things. Because, as we talked, that each sector is not created equal, and there's different level of resources and, I guess, tools out there for them. So by bringing the entire organization to bear, you allow your virtual CISOs to go out to these companies and bring all that knowledge with them. So I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, thanks for that. What are we missing? What are we not doing well?
I don't want to say what you're not doing well. I mean, I can say where I've seen you start and where you are. I'd love to see a larger market presence so people understand what you're doing and what you're offering, and they understand how important it is. You've got a great word of mouth network, but I don't see strangers coming in because, again, it's a great word of mouth, but just not. I don't see it making its way on the main CEOs like, oh, I need to contact and get a virtual CISO for this organization. I love the fact that you guys are doing a platform. So it's like a add water kind of capability for any organization. This is the standard practice. This is what you need to be doing. This is how you can use AI as a force multiplier for some of these tasks. I think that's fantastic. I'd also like to eventually see some further development where you've got a resource library. So I can pull down, okay, in the water sector, what are they required to be doing? What are the best practices? What are the technologies they're using? What are the systems that are there? What are the incredible lessons learned from things like not water, but energy, colonial pipeline, I guess transportation sector. What are those CISO lessons learned from their battle-hardened experiences? Not just they're qualified, great. A lot of people can be qualified, but what have you learned and how are you going to mitigate and how have you mitigated issues and recovered from things in the past? I'd love to see that. That would be fantastic.
That's such a great answer. And let me just show you one little bit of data. This is just internal typically, although a lot of people are watching. This is really our first email to drive traffic to our website. And this was yesterday, the day before yesterday. So you see how it's flat. We haven't tried to communicate anything about this. We've been entirely, below the radar until really just yesterday. So we're at that stage now. We're still building, and we're doing a lot of listening and learning. And Bob has really done an amazing job creating the elements of the platform and things like that. And I want to just add for this, Bob, is this the slide that you
That's
want
the
to
one,
do?
yeah.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up now in the way that we began, with first of all, let me thank all of you for who you are and what you do and why you do it, and to our audience, same to you as well, for sure. We really appreciate it. I popped in a few comments throughout, but many people are very interested in this. And Bob, we'll just leave the closing remarks in your hands. And if you can just stay on for a minute after we close, we'll just wrap up some details.
Absolutely. Well, so bringing this all back to Copernicus and understanding what's at the center of the universe, I think that keeping our focus on what is important is really harder today than it was in Copernicus times, or even the 1990s when Admiral Tuttle was doing his work. The organization's cyber universe has to be influenced by risk and the availability of funding. That is what happens there. To ensure that you can justify the spend, you have to ask the question, what should be important? Having a framework like the NIST cybersecurity framework available to you is always a way to put the focus on the right important things and put those things at the head of the line for funding. Knowing what you have to protect and having the tools and processes necessary, that ensures that you can succeed, especially in the parts of the cybersecurity framework that are important. Let's get up front. Let's identify, protect, and then figure out how to detect when shenanigans are happening in your cyber universe. And let's figure out what is really important. So you have to do the math. You have to know what your risk tolerance is. You have to know how long you can last during and after a cyber attack, really. So for me, at the center of my cyber universe is resilience. And George, it's a homage to your superhero persona. But I believe that managing risk today means that I have to evaluate not only people, but processes and the tools needed to protect the data and the information that is important to our businesses. I need to know how fast and how accurate my teams can be in responding to the inevitable cyber attacks. So just like in the days of Copernicus and Admiral Tuttle, I think we're now in another revolutionary stage, especially with artificial intelligence. Let's put the focus where it needs to be, in the center of our cyber universe. This is that Copernicus moment, AI and ML. What is the gravitational pull of those capabilities in our orbit? And let's also fuel what's important by putting the thoughts about cybersecurity enabled by AI and machine learning. Let's put that at the center of our cybersecurity universe.
Yeah, indeed. And I'll just echo the LinkedIn user who says, great panel. Thanks to everyone. Very informative and great discussion. And for more information, just go to our website, CHNVCISO.com, just to learn more about some of the stuff that we're doing and to help if you want to. So on behalf of a grateful digital universe, thanks to our amazing panelists. This lasted really 2 hours, and in my own mind, I was thinking, oh man, that might, be a little long, but I could listen to all of you, all day, and I think our audience is really going to benefit a lot from this. Plus, we're also going to edit this into some shorter versions that focus on specific, subsets of the great conversation, that we had, and we'll include links to all of your comms so that this lives on. So thanks again, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.